Estimadas amigas y amigos, en nombre de Sea Mar, Centros de Salud de la Comunidad, me es muy grato dar la bienvenida a todos ustedes a nuestro festival Sea Mar Fiestas Patrias en su edición del año 2021. La pandemia del COVID-19, de la cual estamos afortunadamente saliendo, ha aconsejado que todavía este año nuestra celebración se ofrezca en el modo virtual, tal y como con gran éxito lo hicimos el año pasado. Estamos esperanzados que para el que viene podamos festejar nuevamente en persona con las cosas que nos gustan tanto y que todavía el espacio cibernético no admite. No hay en verdad sustituto para el contacto físico que con tanta frecuencia los latinos utilizamos. Ciertamente, el mundo virtual en el que el coronavirus nos sumergió nos deja también novedosas formas de relación personal que en un instante une al mundo entero y nos extiende y nos expande por todos los confines con un solo clic. Sea Mar Fiestas Patrias es uno de los tradicionales eventos de Festal, programa de Seattle Center que reúne a los principales festivales étnicos de la región. Sin su entusiasmo, su compromiso y su organización, este evento no sería posible. Festal nos hace sentir a los latinos como ingrediente indispensable de lo que hoy es la gran familia pluricultural de Seattle y del condado de King. Fiestas Patrias 2021, celebración que recuerda la independencia de todos los pueblos de la patria grande que es Latinoamérica, ha buscado que 5 países de nuestro continente presenten muestras de sus propias culturas a través de artistas que viven en el estado de Washington, pero cuyos orígenes están en México, en Guatemala, en El Salvador, en Perú y en Chile. Así enlazamos varias generaciones, varias visiones, varias creencias que se manifiestan en este gran país en el que vivimos todos nosotros, que es los Estados Unidos de América. Hoy lo mismo disfrutaremos de cantantes, danzantes, poetas, chefs de cocina y de académicos. Invitamos también a exponentes de la cultura chicana a que nos recuerden sus orígenes, sus retos y desafíos y sus esperanzas como entidad nueva y distinta, igual pero diferente. Sea Mar, por mi conducto, quiere agradecer a los patrocinadores de este festival, For Culture, BECU y Providence a través de su programa Hospice, y a todos los patrocinadores de Festal. A los cónsules de México, Guatemala, El Salvador, Perú y Chile, nuestro agradecimiento sincero por unirse una vez más a este esfuerzo cultural con el que saludamos al gran pueblo de los Estados Unidos. ¡Viva Latinoamérica!
Hi, I'm Mayor Jenny Durkin. I would like to share a special greeting with Sea Mar's Fiestas Patrias and express my appreciation for the part the Latino community has placed in the livelihood, culture, and community of our city. This year, countries of Central America celebrate 200 years of their independence declaration. Sadly, the last year has also seen our Latino community disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. In these times, though, we are pleased and proud of the city's efforts to help the Latino community and the work the Latino community has done for Seattle. Happy Independence Day, and please accept my warmest regards for a meaningful and enjoyable festival.
Hello, I'm Robert Nellums, Director of Seattle Center, and I'm pleased to be providing words of welcome on behalf of Seattle Center Festal for the 2021 virtual Sea Mar Fiestas Patrias Festival. Festal is a series of 24 free ethnic cultural festivals produced by community organizations and presented throughout the year in partnership with Seattle Center. Festal provides space for people to come together to celebrate their culture, share their traditions, and for people from different communities to learn from one another. Today, I'm pleased to be speaking with Jorge Madrazo, Sea Mar Vice President of Community Relations, the producer of Sea Mar Fiestas Patrias Festival, which has partnered with Seattle Center Festal since 2010. Hello, Jorge, and thank you for your passionate dedication to the organization, this important and popular festival for all of us to enjoy.
Thank you very much, Robert, for your very kind welcoming remarks. And if I may, I would like to start by acknowledging your staff, the staff of Festal, of Seattle Center, of McCaw Hall, for a very hard work. I'm very impressed, really amazed with the professionalism of all of your team members. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Jorge, let's start with a little background about Fiestas Patrias. Not everyone out there knows about this festival and how it commemorates the independence of Latin American countries. How is it that Sea Mar Community Health Centers came to be hosting the local Fiestas Patrias celebrations?
Well, Sea Mar has been celebrating Fiestas Patrias for a long time. We start celebrating with a parade in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is South Park.
Mm-hmm.
So we had celebrations in the community center, marching along the streets of beautiful South Park. And all of a sudden, we jumped to Seattle Center to share with the community at large our proud of our big country, big nation named Latino American. It's not only Mexico, it's all the peoples and nations of the countries that runs in the north with the Rio Bravo, Rio Colorado, all the way to La Patagonia in the south. This is our big, big country and nation. And we celebrate that. And we celebrate marching, singing, dancing, doing what we love to do, Robert.
That's great. I'd love to see that. I want to recognize the frontline work Sea Mar Community Health Centers has carried throughout the pandemic. This time of crisis has required the most from our medical providers, and Sea Mar is managing health centers that are saving lives. Sea Mar is also out in the community distributing essential supplies and making sure people have accurate information and access to essential services. Through all of these challenges, your team has still hosted an online festival, offered a place to feel joy and to celebrate the diversity of the Latino cultural traditions. What you are doing is so very important.
Well, let me say that Sea Mar, as a community health center, provide comprehensive services to individuals and communities. Our methodology is a holistic approach. So we need to understand all type of needs of people. Of course, medical needs, but besides medical, dental, behavioral health, affordable housing, education, and a lot of social programs. We need this comprehensive approach in order to serve better communities that are, Robert, really underserved. We are here to serve the underserved, to provide services to people living with a lot of challenges. That's why the first clinic of Sea Mar started in South Park, a neighborhood with a lot of challenges and underserved communities. Mm-hmm. So we try to do all of this for the community because the final goal, the ultimate goal of Sea Mar is to empower the community. Mm-hmm. And we empower the community providing all of these services. So we are happy to do that. So one of the many things that we do along the year is Fiestas Patrias. We love to celebrate. We love to sing, to dance, to eat with our communities. This is part of the essential way of being of our organization.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic, and it's essential for all of us to be there so we can experience part of it with you, because you guys have such a great time.
You can imagine that in the times of the pandemic, Sea Mar has provided almost 250,000 vaccines to the communities.
Wow.
And we are doing this with a net of more than 100 clinics in Western Washington. So this is our cause, this is our mission, and we're happy doing this.
This year's festival has a focus on specific countries. Which countries are being featured, and why those countries?
Well, this year, Robert, we invite countries with a consular representation in the Emerald City or in the Evergreen State. I would say most of them in the metropolitan area of Seattle. So countries invited were Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Peru, and Chile. And the participation of the consuls were excellent. It was a very, very important, a huge undertaking by my friends, the consuls of Latin America. I hope next year Honduras may join us in order to have the 6th consulate of Latin America present in our Fiestas Patrias. So we try to combine different type of artist expressions. So we have the culinary, it's an art, and we Latin Americans, we enjoy that art. Dancing, singing, and poetry. And we combine different generations and all performances by local artists. So I would say this year, one of the things that we stress is the presentation of people living in Washington State, living most of them in the Seattle metropolitan area. So this is very unique for this virtual celebration, even different than the celebration that we had last year. And this year, Robert, besides the celebration of independence, there are countries celebrating the bicentennial. So a special congratulations to the peoples of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Peru.
Excellent, excellent. So Chicano is not a country, but it's a culture. So how does the Chicano segment fit into this year's theme?
Well, Chicanos are in the very fabric of United States society, Washington State society, Seattle society, and Sea Mar society. Many of our founders, the founders of the organization, are Chicanos themselves. Chicano is not a country. Chicano is a culture. Culture as a set of beliefs, as a set of common beliefs. And we invited a very, very brilliant scholar, Professor Jerry Garcia, to explain what Chicano means these days. What are the challenges, their opportunities? What is Chicano? How can we share the Chicano culture with other cultures in the city of Seattle, and not only the city of Seattle, in all the world that the cyberspace may reach. So that's why we complete the presentation of countries with this culture that is the origin of many important expressions in the city of Seattle, in Washington State.
Wow. That's just too much. The Latino community is the largest minority in the United States, and in Washington, the diversity of the Latino community is very significant. And what is the vision you have of the Latino community in the future, in our city, in our state, and in our country?
Well, yes, in Washington State, the Latino community represents 13% of the population, and growing very fast in King County and in the city of Seattle. So we are important not only in numbers. Every day, we see more Latinos taking very significant positions in the economy, in the political life, in the professional jobs, in our society. So what I see for the Latino community is a very brilliant horizon, a future, plenty of success. But we need our young people with better avenues to reach education and higher educations. Or we need our community working together in order to open those avenues and to take our young people to those very important areas in higher education. If we do that, if we are consistent in that effort, if we persevere with discipline, with faith, with hope, I think that the future is brilliant.
Oh, you're very deep. So thank you, Jorge, for talking with me today. I wish you, your board, and leadership of Sea Mar Community Health Centers and all the volunteers who help make the festival possible all the very best in this year's virtual presentation. For all of you people out there, I think that you can hear the passion in Jorge's voice. You can hear the commitment and the passionate just feelings that he has, not just about the festival, but about the people and their growth, their education, and where they're headed. And we should all feel that way about all our people. And that's a message that we can take from Festal to everyone else. So Jorge, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much for being so passionate about what it is you're doing and how you're helping the festival proceed through a virtual tour this year. And we look forward to having you come back and for in-person festival next year.
We are ready for 2022.
We are too, sir. But we want everybody to watch 2021 first, and then we'll see you in 2022. So thank you so much for being here. And as I always tell people, peace.
Very honored. Thank you.
La noche del 15 de septiembre de 1810, el cura don Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla tocó las campanas de la iglesia de Dolores y llamó al pueblo a luchar por la independencia del Imperio Español. El 16 de septiembre se celebra oficialmente la independencia de México y es reconocida el 27 de septiembre de 1821 mediante la firma del Acta de la Independencia del Imperio Mexicano. Cada año en México y en el mundo se conmemora el momento en el que don Miguel Hidalgo llamó a la insurrección con la ceremonia llamada El Grito.
Estimados amigos, me da mucho gusto poder estar aquí el día de hoy para celebrar estas fiestas nacionales con ustedes. Muchas gracias a Sea Mar por organizar este evento que nos permite recordar la importancia de la historia en formar nuestras identidades. En el caso de México, el 16 de septiembre de 1810, el cura Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla da el grito de Dolores desde la parroquia de Dolores, Guanajuato, dando inicio a la Guerra de Independencia Mexicana. La historia de México es una historia de mexicanos y mexicanas superando la adversidad para entregarle a sus hijos y hijas un mejor mañana. Es importante que usemos este sustento histórico para continuar unidos. Es importante que celebremos con alegría, pero también que sigamos todos los lineamientos de las autoridades de salud para asegurarnos que todos podamos retomar nuestras actividades normales lo más pronto posible. Muchas gracias y ¡viva México!
¿Qué tal amigos? Mi nombre es Emanuel Calderón, soy el chef ejecutivo del Hotel Four Seasons y hoy que es 16 de septiembre, qué mejor manera de celebrar que preparando uno de los platillos más tradicionales de la cocina mexicana, chiles en nogada. Los chiles en nogada son uno de los platillos típicos de estas fechas patrias. Es originario del estado de Puebla y aparte de ser un platillo exquisito, se prepara con los ingredientes de temporada que representan los colores de nuestra bandera mexicana, convirtiéndolo en uno de los platillos mexicanos más representativos de nuestro país. Acompáñanos para ver cómo se prepara. Para esta receta vamos a necesitar varios ingredientes y vamos a comenzar con el relleno. El relleno tradicionalmente se elabora con biznaga, pero en este caso vamos a utilizar otro tipo de frutos secos como son pasas, chabacano, manzana roja, pera, almendra fileteada, carne de cerdo, carne de res, especias como clavo, canela, vamos a necesitar jitomate, cebolla blanca y ajo. Para la nogada podemos utilizar algún queso fresco, en este caso estoy utilizando queso de cabra, leche, nuez de Castilla, azúcar y vino de Jerez. Para el capeado vamos a necesitar harina y huevos. Además vamos a necesitar perejil, granada y la estrella de este platillo, el chile poblano. Para el relleno vamos a empezar colocando aceite y lo vamos a calentar a fuego medio. Vamos a agregar la carne de cerdo, carne de res y vamos a empezar a cocinarlo hasta que se empiece a dorar. Mientras la carne se está cocinando, vamos a hacer un caldillo con el jitomate, la cebolla y el ajo. Y en este mismo caldillo vamos a agregar clavo y también vamos a agregar la canela. Ya que la carne está doradita, vamos a agregar el caldillo. Vamos a bajar el fuego, lo vamos a poner como a fuego medio y lo vamos a continuar cocinando por aproximadamente 15 minutos. También a este punto es cuando vamos a agregar sal y un poco de pimienta. Mientras el relleno se sigue cocinando, vamos a tatemar los chiles poblanos. Tienen que quedar negros como este que tengo aquí. Ya han pasado los 15 minutos y vamos a agregar la almendra fileteada, los chabacanos, las pasitas y vamos a finalizar con la manzana y la pera. Ya que el relleno está listo, no se les olvide probarlo, rectificar el sazón y a este punto lo vamos a dejar enfriar. Para la nogada simplemente vamos a licuar todos los ingredientes y vamos a comenzar con la nuez, queso, vamos a agregar la leche, vamos a poner únicamente un poquito de jerez y finalmente vamos a agregar al azúcar y vamos a empezar con poco y ya después le pueden agregar más. Y esta es la consistencia que tiene que tener la salsa. Para el capeado vamos a necesitar huevo y harina. Vamos a empezar separando los huevos en las claras y las yemas y las vamos a batir por separado. Ya que estén batidos, vamos a incorporar las yemas en las claras y vamos a mantener la mezcla en refrigeración. Para finalizar, vamos a empezar a calentar aceite y mientras el aceite se está calentando, vamos a pelar los chiles. Ya que los chiles están limpios, vamos a retirar las semillas y vamos a comenzar a rellenar. Y ya que los rellenamos, hay que asegurarnos que el chile esté bien cerrado y así es como les tiene que quedar. Para el capeado, simplemente vamos a poner los chiles con la harina y después los vamos a poner directo en el capeado. Y ya que esté bien cubierto, lo vamos a freír. Ya una vez en el aceite, lo vamos a dejar entre 2 y 3 minutos por cada lado. Y ya que está listo, lo vamos a dejar reposar en un papel absorbente o en una toalla de cocina. Espero que hayan disfrutado de esta receta y que puedan preparar unos chiles en nogada en su casa. ¡Felices Fiestas Patrias!
Hola amigos, somos Un Rompepera y quiero mandar saludos a toda la gente de Washington en estas Fiestas Patrias. Queremos agradecer al Mexan por la invitación. También queremos agradecer por su buen trabajo a Sea Mar y queremos saludar a toda la banda del Consulado de México en Seattle. Les vamos a presentar El Pájaro Sin Sontle. ¡Viva la cumbia! ¡Cuídense, amigos! ¡Nos vemos pronto! ¡Ah!
Estimados guatemaltecos que residen en el noroeste del país, es un privilegio el poder dirigirme a ustedes en nombre de las autoridades del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores de la República de Guatemala, en el marco de la conmemoración de los 200 años de declaración y lucha por la independencia de nuestro país, momento en el cual honramos a los hombres y mujeres que lucharon por una patria libre. En ese sentido, el bicentenario de nuestra independencia también es una oportunidad para ratificar el compromiso que como guatemaltecos tenemos para lograr una nación respetuosa de sus valores, patrimonio milenario y de su diversidad étnica y pluricultural, contribuyendo con ello a una Guatemala mejor. El Consulado General de Guatemala en Seattle agradece a Sea Mar por permitirnos nuevamente festejar de forma conjunta nuestras fiestas patrias.
A ti, tierra del Quetzal, a ti que hueles a monja blanca, a ti que tienes corazón guerrero, a ti Guatemala es mi canción. Te sueño en cada amanecer, suspiro porque te quiero ver. Y si lejos de ti yo muero, quiero que me lleven a tu suelo descansar. Y si lejos de ti yo muero, quiero que me lleven a tu suelo descansar. Guatemala, Guatelinda, Guatebella, mi doncella es tu eterna primavera, el perfume para Dios. Y si lejos de ti yo muero, quiero que me lleven a tu suelo descansar. A ti, tierra del Quetzal, a ti que hueles a monja blanca, a ti que tienes corazón guerrero, a ti Guatemala es mi canción. Guatemala, Guatelinda, Guatebella, mi doncella es tu eterna primavera, el perfume para Dios. Y si lejos de ti yo muero, quiero que me lleven a tu suelo descansar. Y si lejos de ti yo muero, quiero que me lleven a tu suelo descansar. Al pasar por la majada, yo vi una sanjuanerita de los ojazos muy grandes y de la boca chiquita. Era tan chula la histía que me dejó enamorado. que a cambio de sus labios Dios le puso un clavel. San Juanerita preciosa, llena mi boca de miel, ya que a cambio de tus labios Dios te puso un clavel. Ay, 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 San Juanerita, si me llegas a querer, viviremos en tu pueblo cuando seas mi mujer. Todos los días pasaba con su canasto de flores y yo siempre la esperaba para cantarle mis amores. Me miraba y se reía y jugaba con su trenza, porque decía la patoja que me tenía vergüenza. San Juanerita preciosa, llena mi boca de miel, ya que a cambio de tus labios Dios te puso un clavel. Ay, 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 San Juanerita, si me llegas a querer, viviremos en tu pueblo cuando seas mi mujer.
Entre el azul del cielo y el azul de dos mares, en el horizonte emergen tus verdes montañas y majestuosos volcanes. Engalana el panorama, el paisaje pintoresco, entre valles, lagos y ríos, que destaca los colores de los frutos y las flores. El legado de los mayas, reyes, profetas, poetas, por su cultura ancestral, te dan honor y gloria en la historia universal. Los códices, las estelas, ciudades y pirámides son vestigio de dominio de matemáticas, las artes, arquitectura e ingeniería. Eres amada Guatemala, país de la eterna primavera, tierra del son y la marimba, la preciosa monja blanca y cuna del libre quetzal, verde plumaje, corazón rubí. Salve patria, Guatemala, no eres tan solo mi patria, eres de aquel que ama tus verdes montañas, volcanes y paisajes coloridos que relatan 1000 historias de tu gente. Gente noble que venera, dando dádivas de amor a los ancestros, la familia, tu historia, memorias, la magna naturaleza, aves, flora, selva, fauna, los frutos de la estación. En la amada Guatemala, con historia legendaria, tierra del bello quetzal, tradiciones y culturas se entrelazan y florecen en la primavera eterna de su fecundo suelo. No eres tan solo mi patria, eres de aquel que te honra, maíz, cacao y frijol, cardamomo y arroz, que se cultivan fecundos para dar su fruto al mundo. Salve patria, Guatemala. Bella tierra del Quetzal, con regocijo, orgullo y las notas de la marimba, desbordando patrio amor, conmemoramos tu libertad. Se rompieron las cadenas, declarándote pueblo libre, soberano e independiente. Un gran legado a tus hijos para regir tu destino. No se debe claudicar al defender el honor patrio. No importa en dónde estemos, somos tus hijos, oh patria, y venceremos tirano y verdugo que tu suelo pretenda manchar. Es nuestra bella Guatemala, país de la eterna primavera, dotada de majestuosos volcanes, montañas, ríos, lagos y valles. La patria que nos vio nacer, en donde nuestras raíces están. Tierra pródiga, bendita de Dios. Celebremos con alegría el bicentenario de la independencia patria, ondeando hermosa bandera con los colores del cielo, azul, blanco y azul, y su escudo triunfal. El bello y libre Quetzal se eleva eternamente, festejando tu libertad. Al perfilar los volcanes, montañas, ríos y valles, al estruendo de dos mares con el ritmo de marimba. Las marchas, desfiles, caravanas con antorchas, mercados de comida típica, danza, música comunal, este año se ausentarán. No así el patriotismo, amor y lealtad de tus hijos, patria amada, Guatemala. En el talle delgado de América Latina, equinoccio virtual de primavera, Dios nutre de leyendas y de aromas, paisajes de mística belleza que te colman de donaire hasta su altura. Tu figura sensual, hecha de tierra, se engalana con mazorcas de maíz en el verde huipil de los volcanes. Y en las tardes de armónicos reflejos me invade la nostalgia de tu ausencia. Privilegio es nacer en tu regazo, mitológica, extraña, tierra maya. Tu voz intensa de hormigo en la marimba resuena en el plumaje verde azul de tu montaña, donde el Quetzal traza su vuelo libertario bajo el manto celeste de tu cielo, y la sangre de Tecún vibra en mi sangre. Ya el arado del amor va abriendo surcos. Ya germinan de nuevo las semillas en un nuevo amanecer para la patria. Hoy tu suelo se nutre de esperanzas, antigua y señorial, amada para siempre, Guatemala, amada para siempre, tierra mía, amada para siempre, Guatemala.
Amigas y amigos, en 2021 llegamos al bicentenario de la independencia de El Salvador, motivo por el cual me siento muy orgullosa de poder dedicar unas palabras en este marco. El gobierno del presidente Nayib Bukele tiene un alto compromiso con promover la unión entre los pueblos de Centroamérica, hecho que ha dejado claro en la solidaridad que ha tenido aún en medio de la pandemia con nuestros vecinos y hermanos de Honduras y Costa Rica. Nuestra nación creyó hace 200 años en la fortaleza de nuestra gente y la necesidad de la autodeterminación de nuestros pueblos para forjar un futuro en paz, libertad, democracia y desarrollo. Hemos tenido momentos duros durante estos 2 siglos y sabemos que este tiempo pospandemia nos obliga a pensar en conjunto para poder salir adelante. Hoy más que nunca, los ideales de una Centroamérica unida y fuerte son importantes para plantearnos un horizonte común que brinde oportunidades de desarrollo a nuestra población. Nuestra experiencia nos ha demostrado que tenemos la fortaleza necesaria para salir delante de todos los retos que se nos han presentado. Juntos podemos lograrlo. Feliz Bicentenario de Independencia.
Esas salvadoreñas, las mujeres más lindas de este mundo. ¡Ay! Oh. Salvadoreñas que lindas son, que me han robado el corazón, tanta boquita para besar, y yo no sé a quién amar. Esas hembras con su caminar me hacen delirar, son rosas de un jardín de amor que el tiempo plantó. Esas hembras con su caminar me hacen delirar, son rosas de un jardín de amor que el tiempo plantó. Y la canción más linda para la mujer más bella, salvadoreña. Salvadoreñas que lindas son, que me han robado el corazón, tanta boquita para besar, y yo no sé a quién amar. Esas hembras con su caminar me hacen delirar, son rosas de un jardín de amor que el tiempo plantó. Esas hembras con su caminar me hacen delirar, son rosas de un jardín de amor que el tiempo plantó. Mira salvadoreña, pero qué linda tú eres, mami. ¡Ay! Con los sabor sentimientos, los trombones. ¡Ay! Esas hembras con su caminar me hacen delirar, sonrisa de un jardín de amor que alguien plantó. Esas hembras con su caminar me hacen delirar, sonrisa de un jardín de amor que alguien plantó. Oh. Y esto como dije, a la mujer más bella del mundo, la salvadoreña. Oh. Oh.
Me es muy grato dirigirme a todos ustedes para expresar nuestras felicitaciones a los países de habla castellana que conmemoran sus fiestas patrias y este mes su bicentenario de independencia. El Perú conmemoró el 28 de julio de este año 200 años de vida republicana. Lo hace con esperanza y deseo de paz y prosperidad para todos los peruanos. Perú en su bicentenario los invita a visitarlo y experimentar su espléndida gastronomía, tierra natal del ceviche y el pisco, de sus maravillas mundiales, Machu Picchu y el Amazonas, de manifestaciones artísticas, la marinera, y cientos de expresiones culturales que enriquecen el tesoro cultural de América. Recordemos en este aniversario, primero, a todos aquellos que nos antecedieron y que sacrificaron sus vidas para que nuestra nación y continente puedan ser siempre democrático y libre. Y segundo, las palabras de don José de San Martín: el Perú es desde este momento libre e independiente por la voluntad general de los pueblos y por la justicia de su causa que Dios defiende. ¡Viva la patria! ¡Viva la libertad! ¡Viva el Perú!
Estimados compatriotas y amigos latinoamericanos, soy el doctor Andrés Barría, profesor de la Escuela de Medicina de la Universidad de Washington y cónsul honorario de la República de Chile. En septiembre, los chilenos, al igual que varios países hermanos del continente, celebramos nuestra decisión tomada ya hace muchos años de hacernos responsables de nuestro propio destino. En primer lugar, quiero aprovechar la oportunidad para agradecer la enorme labor que realiza Sea Mar y todo su personal que ha estado en la batalla contra el COVID-19. Los latinos en el estado de Washington han sufrido enormemente por esta enfermedad y la labor de Sea Mar ha sido fundamental en el esfuerzo de educar a nuestras comunidades acerca de cómo prevenir el contagio, de la importancia que tiene vacunarse y también distribuyendo y vacunando a la población latina. Sea Mar también ha sido importante en mantener nuestros espíritus en alto y ese es el objetivo de estas celebraciones virtuales. Ahora es un buen momento para celebrar que aún estamos aquí, para acordarnos con cariño y respeto de las víctimas de esta pandemia que no conoce fronteras y renovar nuestros compromisos con aquellos ideales de libertad, justicia y dignidad que guiaron a nuestros padres fundadores. Quiero enviar un saludo a todos los compatriotas en el estado de Washington y decirles que a pesar de que nuestras celebraciones se ven minimizadas por la crisis sanitaria que sufre el planeta, este 18 de septiembre los chilenos celebramos en nuestros corazones nuestra independencia. Este año, nuestro grupo de folclore chileno, los Rebeldes de la Cueca, nos han preparado para esta celebración de Fiestas Patrias una pequeña colección de cuecas chilenas que verán a continuación. La cueca es el baile nacional de Chile y muestra al hombre, el guaso, exhibiendo sus dotes de bailes para conquistar a la mujer, que cariñosamente llamamos china. La ropa del guaso es funcional a sus labores en el campo, donde destacan sus espuelas, su polaina, su sombrero y su poncho. La china normalmente viste su traje típico, lleno de colores, o a veces, si la ocasión lo amerita, su traje de gala. En esta ocasión nos acompañarán los bailarines Carola, Marión, Andrea, Caro, Aurelio y Carlos. Muchas felicidades y mucha fuerza, que ya pronto nos volveremos a abrazar en persona.
ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que no, va a iluminar tu sendero. Ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que no, va a iluminar tu sendero. Mi vida, cuando vayas a buscarme, ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que no te canses de mirarme. Ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que no, quisiera ser un lucero. Si me miras me siento transportado al lindo cielo. Ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que no, eres tú lo que más quiero. Ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que no, eres tú lo que más quiero. Al mismo cielo sí, tus ojos son mis senderos. Ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que sí, ahora sí que no, los míos son tus luceros. Luceros y senderos, recorrer el mundo entero.
Salud por los bailarines, salud porque tengo sed. Y para no quedarnos cojos, los fuimos con los otro pie, compadre.
¡A la cancha, niñito! ¡Hacerlo de puntitaco, gacho! ¡Que saca la taquita de goma, oiga! ¡Déjale, yo! ¡Póngale, póngale! ¡Leña, leña! ¡Fuego, fuego! ¡Dale, dale! Pañuelo para la cueca. Pañuelo, pañuelo para llorar. Pañuelo, pañuelo para llorar. En la triste despedida. El pañuelo de flamear. Pañuelo, pañuelo para la cueca. A una herida casual, mi vida está el pañuelo. Para un alma agobiada, mi vida es un consuelo. Para una herida casual, mi vida está el pañuelo. Ay, es un consuelo que mi vida sí está bordado. Recuerdo a una dama, mi vida para su amado. Con pañuelo apretado, mi vida y al sentenciado.
La salitrera y el viento. Me saluda la pampa, la salitrera y el viento. La nostalgia me sale a la memoria, a los hombres valientes que han hecho historia. Al pasar por el norte cruzo el desierto y siguiendo el viaje yo me deleito con las maravillas que hay en el centro. Y siguiendo el viaje yo me deleito. Que hay en el centro en sí también es hermoso. Disfrutar el paisaje del sur caudaloso.
Welcome to the 2021 Fiestas Patrias virtual celebration. My name is William Gallegos, and we're here at the Sea Mar Museum, located in the South Park neighborhood in Seattle. I'm here joined by Dr. Jerry Garcia, a Chicano, Latino, and Latin America historian, author, and vice president of the Sea Mar Museum. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you, Will. Glad to be here for the 2021 Fiestas Patrias Chicano segment. First time we're having this segment for Fiestas Patrias. And I feel confident that in 2022, we'll be back on the streets for Fiestas Patrias, enjoying it.
That's right. We better be celebrating with all our people, right?
That's right. That's right.
Professor Garcia, with over 60 million Latinos in the United States, we've seen in the news how our growth has seen tremendous gain without stopping. We've also heard many terms thrown around to classify us like Hispanic, Latino, and Chicano. But what are all these identities? And how does this pertain to the Chicano identity?
Let me address the population first. So, yeah, roughly it's about 60 million Latinos in the United States. That includes Chicanos, Puertorriqueños, Cubanos, the whole rubric of Latinos. But people of Mexican ancestry make up over 60% of that total population. So in totality, we got 60 million. People of Mexican ancestry represent probably about 40 to 45 million of that total population. And then it's broken down by other groups. And you can see there's a historical reason why Chicanos are the largest. And it's obviously because they're the first group that was incorporated through force, through conquest and invasion by the United States back in the 19th century. And so our population then has grown dramatically since the late 20th century to the contemporary period. And that's why we are so visible in many arenas of the United States in a contemporary period. In regards to the terms that you're talking about, the terms you mentioned are just what I call the nice terms. Okay. You know, there's the term wetback, right? That's been used. Right? Other derogatory terms that have been very racist and got a long history in the United States. But we won't dwell on those today, right? We'll dwell on the term like Hispanic, Latino, and Chicano. And obviously what I'm going to be speaking about today is primarily the Chicano experience. Which means really we're talking about the people of Mexican ancestry in the United States, although there's some commonalities of what I'm about to tell you today in regards to other Latino groups, right? But yeah, so when we look at terms like Hispanic, for example, that's a term, the word itself has been around a long time because of Spanish origin, but as far as it being attached to people of Spanish-speaking ancestry in the United States, that's roughly since the 1970s. And it was a term that was brought forth by the U.S. government to lump us all together under one umbrella rubric. Right, under one term. So whether you're from Costa Rica, Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, you're quote-unquote Hispanic. The problem with that is that it homogenizes us. Right. And we're all seen as the same.
As one in identity.
Right, exactly. Which is completely out of reality, right? Right. Which most of us know that a Mexicano is vastly different in regards to identity and culture than somebody come from Puerto Rico or from Cuba or from El Salvador. And there are some nuances that are important to recognize. For example, if I was to have here in front of us a Cubano, Puertorriqueño, and a Chicano or Mexicano all speaking here together in Spanish, you would hear different dialects. They're speaking Spanish, but they're speaking it differently. Right? So those are kind of the differences and commonalities. So on the one hand, they're speaking Spanish, but on the other hand, they're speaking with different dialects. Right? And I'll be quite honest, the first time I heard a Cubano or Puertorriqueño speak Spanish, I had to listen very closely. It wasn't very easy for me to understand. Because I was used to Mexican Spanish or Chicano Spanish.
Just like there's many dialects, like you mentioned, many customs are passed around through generations and cultures. But what is a Chicano culture and how is it different from the Mexican culture?
Well, it's like a dialects, right? When we look at Mexican culture from Mexico and Chicano culture here in the United States, there are commonalities. And the main reason is because Chicano culture, a lot of it's based on their origins, which is Mexico. Mm-hmm. Right? So a lot of the customs that are practiced in Mexico were brought over, right? Or incorporated during the conquest invasion of the 19th century. And that remained in what used to be Mexico's northern territories, but are now the American Southwest. And so, but however, over time, right, a lot of that culture has changed. And the primary reason for that change, the primary mechanism for that change is because of the U.S. experience here in the United States, right? So So now what we see here from the Chicano perspective, but also we could broaden that. We could also include just Latinos in general, because it's not just people of Mexican ancestry that are growing up here in the United States. We've got people from all over Latin America who are here. Right. And so what I say about Chicanos is also relevant to the broader Latino diaspora. So when we look at Chicano experience, for example, in the early formative years of our existence in the United States, a lot of our culture is going to be very similar to that of Mexico. But as time moves forward, right, as we get closer to the contemporary period, what's happening to our community, to our culture, is being mixed with mainstream traditional white culture. Okay, so we're getting a mixture then. That's why, for example, we're going to have a lot of people in our community, even very early on, beginning to speak English, where before they only spoke Spanish. Okay, and that's why also let's take a look at religiosity. Right? Okay. That's an area that we often don't talk about. But as we see the incorporation of Chicanos into the United States, the overwhelming majority are Catholics, right? They're practicing Catholicism. Right. But as we move forward in time, other U.S.-based denominations, especially the Protestant denominations, are going to make inroads into the Chicano community. And what that means then is that a lot of Chicanos then are going to either leave the Catholic Church, or their original place of worship will not be the Catholic Church, but a Protestant place of worship. And so you can see, and that all has to do with their experience in the United States, their contact with mainstream Americans, white people, and their association with mainstream institutions, and the church being one of those. Right. So we got religiosity. We also got, for example, one of the best examples I can use, because I think everybody enjoys music. Right. So I like to use music oftentimes to describe a little bit about Chicano identity and culture. And the one form that I really like to show, because it's a form of what I call continuity, right? It's a form of culture that has not changed very much from its origins, and that's Mexico. And that is a genre known as the corrido. Oh, okay. I brought a sample of a corrido called El Corrido de Arnulfo González. Very famous one. Let's hear it a little bit, and then we'll say a few words about it.
Let's hear it.
Okay.
Gratos recuerdos dejó al pueblo y a los rurales. Estaba Arnulfo sentado y en eso pasó un mural. Te dice, y es que me ves, la vista es muy natural. El rural muy enojado en la cara le pegó, con su pistola en la mano, con la muerte le amagó. Arnulfo se levantó, llamándole la atención. Oiga, amigo, no se vaya, falta mi contestación. Se agarraron a balazos, se agarraron frente a frente. Arnulfo con su pistola, 3 tiros le dio al teniente.
I love that song.
Good song.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's my favorite version of El Corrido de Arnulfo González. There are many versions of this, and there are other ones I like. For example, Ramon Ayala sings a version of it. Antonio Aguilar sings a version of it, and there's a whole list of other groups.
All our idols, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a famous song because it's filled with imagery of the early 20th century Mexican culture, masculinity. So it's filled with all these kind of images, and it's a very traditional song. One of the things I wanted to mention for those who aren't acquainted with corridos is a corrido, coming from the word correr, as I mentioned earlier, is a running history of an event, an individual, or an organization. So the corrido emerged as a form of oral tradition or communication to the community to understand that was happening. That's why the height of the corrido, especially writing, composition of corridos, was the Mexican Revolution. And that's why there are literally thousands written during that time period, because people were talking about the battles, the heroes, the villains of the revolution.
It's oral history.
Absolutely, oral history. So the corrido then, as it was formed back in the 19th century, perhaps even earlier based on some scholars, has remained almost intact into the contemporary period. Whether you're in Mexico or in the United States, that tradition continues. For example, the corrido that we just heard was written about an event that took place in the 1920s. The corrido was written about a year after the event. The version that we listened to was recorded in 1946. And so we fast forward, and I'll mention the individuals that displayed in our museum. Cesar Chavez. A corrido about Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers was created in the 1970s, right? And then we move forward to the 80s and 90s. The Chicano community is still creating corridos about historical events or individuals. Right? Same thing is happening in Mexico. But one of the interesting things about the corrido is that there are subgenres now of the corrido. And the one I'll just briefly mention, and I can't get into a long discussion, that one of the subgenres is very famous is the narco corrido.
Very popular.
Very popular, absolutely. So for those of you that are not familiar with that term, those are corridos written about drug trafficking. And Los Tigres del Norte, right? If you're a Mexicano worth your salt, you'll know that band.
I've heard that name since I was 1 year old,
right?
Or younger.
So Los Tigres wrote one of the earliest, or I should say they sung, because I think they didn't write it. They actually sung one of the earliest narco corridos here in the United States. I believe it was recorded in 1972, 1973, called Contrabando y Traición. And back in that time period, the drug that was heavily trafficked into the United States was marijuana. Right? So that was the big drug. And this song talks about that, talks about a couple involved in drug trafficking, and of course the tragedy. It's a tragedy in that corrido. And so the narco corrido is very, very famous today here in the United States and in Mexico. And so the corrido, though, is still being used today as a form of oral history, tradition, and communication.
That's such a nice song. It's so fascinating. As you mentioned, Chicanos and Chicanas is a chosen identity for some Mexican Americans. We also understand that Mexican identities are extremely varied on their own, with their own set of cultures as well, such as Euro-Latinos, Afro-Latinos, Mestizos, and Indigenous people. Now tell me, can Chicanos claim Indigenous roots? Is that possible?
Well, absolutely. And it's also a very complex question. I mean, all these questions are very complex. You must have taken a class in Chicano studies at some point in your life.
Not yet. It'll be from you.
You're getting a little primer here. Right. But the very word Chicano or Chicana is really reflective of that indigeneity, right? Somebody claiming their indigenous past. Because that term, we don't know exactly how old it is, but it goes back at least to the period of indigenous history, or prior to the arrival of Europeans. And it's always had this connotation to it. They refer to somebody outside of the culture. For example, there's literature that argues that the term Chicano was used in the Aztec Empire, and it referred to somebody that wasn't part of the inner circle of the empire. That was somebody out in the margins. So if it's that old, at least, right? We're talking the 14th century, the 15th century. If it's that old, at least, then that connotation remained in place all the way into the 20th century. Because when Chicanos become part of the United States in the 19th century, that term obviously is transported into the U.S. Kind of cultural arena, and it's looked at as a negative term, so negative that the parents of children don't want them associated with that term, because it really means what it always has meant: somebody who's on the margin, somebody who's an outcast from society. But it also has additional connotations in the United States. It also meant somebody who was prone to criminality, right? That was a delinquent. So the parents really kind of pushed on the children, do not use this term Chicano. And that remained well into the 1960s until we had the Chicano movement, when Chicano and Chicana activists want to reclaim that term as part of their indigenous roots. And they do. They take it back, and they put a kind of a badge of honor on it that no longer to them meant what it meant in the past. Now it means, and to this day, it means somebody who's very much committed to the community, looking for social change and a better worldview, right? So that's what it means today. But I'll be quite honest with you, there are still some people, the older generation, that still has kind of negative views of the term Chicano. And that's why it's not as popular as a term like Hispanic or Latino, which are probably two terms that are more popular in our community at the national level than the term Chicano. Right? And so, but getting back directly to the question, many people who identify as Chicano see themselves as indigenous. I'll use myself as an example. When I fill out the census data, there is no category in regards to race for people of Spanish-speaking ancestry, because the term Hispanic or Latino that comes out is not a racial category; it's an ethnicity, right? It's an ethnicity. So I check off my ethnic background, which is I choose the term Latino, right? But when it comes to race, there's only Asian, Black, White, and Indigenous, and so I check Indigenous because I'm closer associated with that culture than anything else that's on that list. I would often tell the students this. I mean, take a professor, for example. I mean, look at me, right? There's no doubt that I am part Indigenous and part white. And the term that's often used with that is called mestizo,
yes,
right? And that's an old term, Spanish term, that was used during the colonial period as part of their caste system. So that's why, in Chicano studies, we kind of have an issue with that, because that created this hierarchy, right, in Spanish America and Latin America in general, right? So there was a racial hierarchy in Latin America where you had whites, known as bien insulares, at the very top, right? Then they even divided themselves in regards to the whiteness. You're a whiter if you were a Spanish born in Spain. If you were a Spaniard born in the Americas, you were called a criollo. Right? But to the officials, that designated somebody who was perhaps suspect, right? Because they weren't born in the homeland; they were born in the Americas. Right? Then you had mestizos, people who are half white and half indigenous, and then you have indigenous people, right? Indians, and then you had blacks at the very bottom of this racial hierarchy that was created during this time period, and so, but one interesting thing is that most Chicanos who identify as indigenous, even though they are mixed, right, some mixture, I know very few Chicanos who identify with their whiteness. Most of them identify with their indigenous past, and I think it has to do with the oppression, right? Our field of Chicano studies that really attack this idea of whiteness and white supremacy and white privilege. Right? And so we kind of move away from that privilege itself. We could claim it only in name, because somebody looks at me and they're going to say, "Well, you don't look white." But leading to another part of this answer is that we can't forget that a lot of Chicanos and a lot of Mexicanos, even though they might not want to admit this, they are part black, right? Part Asian, right?
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, part Middle Eastern. All those groups have come into Mexico, and they've been there for hundreds of years. And there's no doubt that they have mixed. And one great example I'll give you in regards to that is that there's this fallacy, this kind of a false narrative on part of people from New Mexico. I'm sorry if you're from New Mexico, this is part of your history, that Chicano studies attacks. And this is the idea that Spaniards in that area, today, New Mexicans in that area, some of them claim to be pure Spanish blood, which is historically inaccurate.
Very inaccurate.
Yeah, and the simple way to answer that is because the moment Spaniards arrived there, they began to rape and miscegenate with indigenous women.
Yeah.
And so the mixing began the moment they got there. So this idea then of a pure Spaniard living in the Americas, or even for that matter, we could even argue the same thing in Spain. We can't forget for 700 years, the Moors ruled over Spain for 700 years.
That's right.
So you can't tell me that not one person mixed during that time period. Right? So yeah, this is all about whiteness and white privilege and white supremacy, that emerges very early in the Americas. And so that's why there are a lot of terms in our history that we got to learn about and teach about, but also be able to navigate and understand what they mean, what they meant back then and what they mean today. And so absolutely, a lot of us who are claim this, this Chicano-ness and our Mexicanness, right? Claim indigeneity. And the last thing I'll say is this. This is such a, kind of a, not unusual, but it's a fascinating topic for me, and that's why I've always studied it. There's a time period in our history where white people, tried to name us, right? They tried to say, okay, we're no longer going to call you Mexican. Now you're going to be a Latin American or a Spanish American, because we don't like the term Mexican, All right? And so here you have whites imposing their views, and more importantly, they're imposing a name on us, right? And that's why there's a lot of rejection of Hispanic, because government officials chose that term for us. We didn't get a say in it. Right? So when it comes to then the term Mexican, it kind of disappears from the language for a very long time in U.S. history, right? And it's also connected because let's say this: Mexican Americans aren't immune to this either. This idea of distancing themselves from their indigenous past. A lot of Mexicans did not want to be known as Mexicans because they understood that being Mexican meant that you're also indigenous. And all you got to do is look at the history of how Mexico and the United States have treated indigenous people. Horrible, right? Mm-hmm. Horrible. Genocide, displacement, dispossession, all of that. And so there's this mentality that we don't want to be associated with the term Mexican because it's talking about people being Indian. And we don't want to be Indian because we want to be treated the way Indians are treated. So there's kind of that mentality, right? Instead of embracing it and fighting against that oppression, they succumb to it. Right? So.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia, for educating us today on such important topics, something that we need to learn and understand as we're growing in our culture. And it's a very important topic for Fiestas Patrias. So we appreciate you, we thank you, and thank you all for watching today our virtual 2021 Sea Mar Fiestas Patrias. Now, if you want to learn more about Chicano Latino culture in the Pacific Northwest, we invite you to come to the Sea Mar Museum located in the South Park neighborhood of Seattle. It opened back in October of 2019, and it showcases and highlights all the migration and all the history that has come from the last 50, 60, or 70 years of our Latino population here in Seattle. Thank you also to Jorge Madrazo, who invited the Chicano community and us to be part of this video. We invite you to keep enjoying the Sea Mar Fiestas Patrias 2021 virtual event. Thank you.
Durante estas fechas, celebramos la libertad y la independencia de varios países en Latinoamérica. La independencia no habría sido posible sin la increíble fuerza y el valor de quienes sacrificaron sus vidas por sus pueblos y sus futuras generaciones. Honramos su grito a la independencia y la libertad uniéndonos como pueblo para seguir enfrentándonos a la injusticia hoy y cada día. Celebramos esta hermosa herencia y legado con muchos latinos que viven en los Estados Unidos.
Nos inspira el maravilloso trabajo de Sea Mar en la comunidad y su dedicación a brindar una excelente atención a todos a través de su amplia gama de servicios adoptados culturalmente. Reconocemos el impacto que han tenido en las comunidades en donde proveen servicios, especialmente las de ascendencia latina, y los aplaudimos por todo lo que han hecho y por lo que continúan haciendo. Providence comparte esa gran dedicación de brindar una excelente atención a todas las personas y de celebrar las fiestas patrias con la comunidad latina y con todos los que creen en la libertad, el valor y la fuerza. Creemos que estos valores nos guían al defender los derechos de los demás y al brindar servicios a las personas que más lo necesitan.
En este momento de celebración, también nos acordamos de la importancia de la familia. La verdad es que muchos padres y abuelos latinos hicieron grandes sacrificios por sus hijos y soportaron dificultades y discriminación. Sabemos que ellos no estarán con nosotros para siempre y por eso apreciamos cada momento hasta el último. Providence comprende lo difícil que puede ser una enfermedad grave y desea asegurarse que los miembros de su familia puedan recibir atención de la mejor calidad desde la comodidad de su hogar durante sus últimos días, semanas o meses. Nuestros servicios de cuidados paliativos y hospice son pagados por Medicare y Medicaid y cubren 5 condados en el estado de Washington. El beneficio de hospice cubre muchos servicios que son brindados por un equipo de proveedores de salud muy capacitados, desde servicios en casa y educación hasta el suministro de equipos que podrían ser necesarios. Esos servicios asegurarán de que su familiar pueda recibir alivio de cualquier dolor o malestar y disminuir el sufrimiento durante este tiempo. Creemos que hospice no se trata de morir, sino más bien de vivir lo mejor que podamos hasta el final de la vida.
Hola, soy Carlos y soy el director del programa de Providence Hospice en la ciudad de Olympia. Hace 18 años, mi abuela vivió su última etapa de vida en un asilo de ancianos y aunque la cuidaron muy bien, me hubiese gustado haber sabido del programa de hospice porque nos hubiera ayudado mucho a ella, a mi familia y a mí en sus últimos meses de vida. Tampoco sabía que el costo del servicio los cubre el seguro u otros programas que existen en el estado. Ahora tengo 15 años trabajando en hospice y tengo el conocimiento de este gran beneficio y me da gusto compartirlo hoy con ustedes.
Estamos muy agradecidos de estar aquí y poder celebrar las fiestas patrias con la comunidad latina y les damos las gracias por su atención. Esperamos poder ser un recurso importante para sus familias. Por favor, llámenos para más información. 425-525-3537.
Somos Providence. Que vivan las fiestas patrias.